Mark Cyffka, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Peter. Glad to be here.
So you are co-founder, COO of a company called AirMine that's in the direct air capture space. Tell us how you got started doing that and where you see the company headed.
Sure thing. And first, just thanks for giving us this platform to share a little bit about us. AirMine is a direct air capture company, as you said, based in Berkeley, California. And I'd say that our road towards starting this company really comes from my co-founder and my background in industry. So we met at Honeywell back in 2012. I have training in chemistry. He's trained in chemical engineering. And it was very exciting to get to work in a large organization like that. Sudeep, the CEO and co-founder, had invented some low global warming refrigerants that are now used in automotive applications and are a large business for Honeywell. Then I was the junior engineer that was learning how things work, but really liked the idea of leveraging, large engineering organizations to do some good in the world. And we stayed in touch over the years, living in the Bay Area, and reconnected about 3 years ago when Sadiq was advising the government of Finland on their deep tech innovation strategy. And I got brought in after I had spent 5 years at BASF helping to scale some products for them for the EV sector, and was helping to advise the government of Finland and some Finnish, and got to really dive into the Nordic approach towards decarbonization and sustainability, and got to talk with a lot of really passionate and inspiring entrepreneurs and people who had started businesses in this kind of global wave of clean tech businesses. And we looked at each other and realized that for direct air capture, which for anyone in the audience that isn't familiar is the process by which air is blown through some system and you pull the carbon dioxide out using engineered methods and then you do something with it, that this concept of direct air capture is only going to work, it's only going to matter if it reaches industrial scale. And so we need more folks that have that real industrial background and have worked in these big industrial companies and have worked at chemical plants and sort of know how they feel and operate, to almost think about what the direct air capture industry needs and what it might look like at scale, and then work backwards towards some process that might actually get us there. And that it's hard to find, I think, folks like that, because for direct air capture, it's very new, it's very nascent. There's a lot of unknowns. It takes a lot of energy. There's all of these things that are very kind of wrapped up in that concept that I think make industry rightfully a little bit hesitant to engage because they're trying to figure out what's there. But it's going to take, I think, folks with that industrial perspective to jump right in. And that's what we did. So I guess the tail end of 2021, we started putting our heads together around what we thought could make sense for a process that could work at scale for direct air capture. And we can talk more about what that looks like. And then 2022, we went into Y Combinator, went through that process, did a fundraising round, and then starting, I guess, May 16th, 2022, we've been off to the races from our facilities in Berkeley, California.
That's awesome. Congratulations and congrats on the fundraising. Y Combinator's great organization, of course. And couldn't agree more. Yeah, we need more folks that have experience in the industrial world to be able to execute on all these energy transition themes. So first, I think you're our first guest that's been through Y Combinator. Can you tell the folks sort of what that is like and why it's worth it, why it's helpful to a company?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we had a great time in Y Combinator. Just to shout out to YC for all they're doing. So Y Combinator at the highest level, it's an accelerator. So if you're a founder or a founding team and you've got like the shell or an idea for a company, you can go to an organization like Y Combinator, and if you get selected, you go into a cohort where they give you advisors and some structure and a real accelerated ramp to basically get your company as mature in terms of your growth rate and like making sure that you're hitting the milestones that investors really care about as quickly as possible. And they take a little equity on the side, but in return, you get kind of this boot camp. And at the end, there's a demo day where you get exposed to lots of different investors. And traditionally, YC, I would say, for most of its history, has been focused on digital and software and sort of companies that aren't really working so much in hardware, although there are hardware companies that definitely come out of YC. But we were And it's, I'd say, a little bit counterintuitive sometimes. A lot of our advisors who were just getting going, maybe YC isn't the right path for kind of capex intensive climate startups. But I would say that this is a very unique moment in the energy transition very broadly. If we think about carbon removal, uh, and who's going to be paying for these services, who can afford to pay for these services? In many ways, it's going to be these digital first companies that have a relatively modest footprint, are making a little bit of money, and can invest in things like this that can appeal to their customer base. And there's no better network than YC to access sort of that group of companies. And also, I think it, coming from industry like we did, it was great to go into a new network. Like we have lots of connections kind of in that industrial world, but not so much in the like the YCC. So this was a chance to really not only broaden our connections into that space, but help the YC network, which is very large, get access into cool climate technologies. Like we hope that we're part of that. And in the past few years, YC has really just done a good job of emphasizing climate corporations, and we just appreciate them for that.
That is really cool. I actually had a digital background too, and then transitioned to energy in 2009. And it's amazing now it's coming full circle with how much the artificial intelligence is driving power generation requirements these days. So you're really seeing those two worlds come together, I think. And to your point about digital companies having a lot of profits and being able to afford to take some steps maybe a little quicker than some other companies that have lower margins, I think is pretty amazing. So you guys went through that process. You raised, you call it a seed round through them?
Yeah, we raised the seed round in the period following YC.
Very good. And when did you close on that?
That would have been late 2022, and we raised about $6.9 million.
That's awesome, right? And that was not the easiest time to raise money during those years. I know 23 was very challenged, and now we continue to 24. Are you guys planning an A round or a seed extension, or what's your sort of thinking around your next round?
Yeah, we're in sort of the early phases of looking at a Series A, and it is challenging for everybody across the board, especially I think for as you mentioned, AI is in this moment of ascendancy, and that's really something that a lot of the investors across the board are really focused on. But there's still room, I think, for a lot of the climate companies if they can show that they've got something real there to put something together.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So I want to go back to what you said about Finland, and the Nordic approach to direct air capture. How would you say it differs from our approach here in the US, and what can we learn from that approach to not just DAC, but decarbonization generally?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because in many ways I think the Nordic context, and I'm not Finnish, so I'm doing a poor job of translating this, I'm sure, but it seems just to be a very culturally held value that protecting the environment is critical, and it's a core thing that a lot of people in that society share. And I think part of it is that in order to protect the environment, you have to pay. Like things, there's a cost to having the quality of life benefit of a sustainable environment. And as a government, I think the way that their sort of tax structure works is that there's more money to go towards kind of projects and kind of programmatic efforts to keep sustainability like a key element of how they operate their society. And in the United States context, it's a very different context, right? There's a different scale, and there's different constituencies and different, I'd say more kind of disagreements on how we should be utilizing kind of government programs to accelerate different themes. But I think that if there's a concerted message that's really valuable, it's that sustainability has a cost, but there is a quality of life improvement there too. And sometimes it can be hard to articulate what that is if not everyone shares that value. But these things are real. And I think just as with each year, we start to see more of the fires and floods and these tornadoes and these are starting to affect everybody. It's getting harder and harder to look away in the sense that just you can't debate whether or not there's more tornadoes or not. It's happening. And I think as more and more people are coming to that sort of very visceral realization, like elements of that Nordic sensibility towards sustainability, I think are going to be, you know, going all over the world. And then just to dive in, you mentioned sort of the Finnish approach to DAC. I would say, and I don't want to speak for the Nordic or the Finnish DAC or CDR ecosystems, because there are definitely some great companies there. But I would say at a really high level, the things that Finland is doing, Finland in particular has a lot of forests and biomass, and they're doing some really exciting, I think, probably pioneering work on how to be really effective with the biomass specific angles of sustainability. So just to highlight, there's a lot of great stuff going on out there.
No, absolutely. Very cool. And so we are seeing companies in the US, I think, start to look at DAC on a large scale. Oxy is one that, of course, comes to mind. Maybe talk a little bit to who you're seeing be able to do DAC at world scale or at industrial scale, and where you see you guys fitting in there, either those efforts or new efforts that are likely to spring up.
Yeah, another great question. So I'll come back to maybe one of the comments I said at the top, which is that in order for DAC to matter, it has to scale. And so we have to look at what are those companies and organizations that operate at the scales that we need for DAC to be meaningful. And like, what lessons can we learn from them? What partnerships can we make? And Oxy is an example of a company where they have made a very public commitment towards advancing direct air capture. And I kind of have to tip my hat to them in the sense that it takes a lot of leadership for executives to stick their neck out on something new, on something expensive, on something unknown, especially in industries where there's a real cost to doing that when things go wrong. So it's a really great to see, you know, companies getting in and taking DAX seriously. And I think now if we look at what's needed in the corporate world for a kind of the ecosystem to make DAC a reality, there's going to be energy companies like Oxy and others that are looking at being able to use their infrastructure knowledge, their construction knowledge, their engineering knowledge to actually build these systems at scale and integrate with the subsurface geological storage, where I think most of the CO2 that's captured in a direct air plant at scale would ultimately go. And it's a pretty small list of companies that can operate at that scale and that have that expertise. And on the other side is demand. We have to have the companies that are saying that we have a big enough emissions footprint and we have kind of a big enough mandate coming from senior leadership to treat our footprint as something that really needs to be mitigated and improve this, and that we're willing to put in time to learn about carbon removal and to learn about DAC specifically and about how that fits into our short and long-term planning. And it takes pretty sophisticated organizations and companies to go through that process as well. And with each passing quarter, it seems like more and more companies are kind of coming to some sort of realization about where they want to sit in either the buy side or for those few companies on the infrastructure side, on the supply side. Then you have sort of the governments of the world kind of incentivizing through tax credits and other regulatory schemes that are coming on, maybe trying to guide that a little bit. But I think that it's just a very dynamic, evolving ecosystem of stakeholders that are trying to understand what they need to do to be a responsible actor and make a little money in this opportunity. And then you have companies like Airmine, and you have other DAC technology providers that I think are often much smaller organizations, usually startups. Many of them are university spinouts. Airmine is a little bit unique in that we're really coming from industry, and even though we have strong relationships with UC Berkeley, kind of where we're based, but like this is an industrial DNA startup. Those are the ones that are out there putting systems in their lab or in the field just to point at and say, like, look, this is actually possible, and de-risk just that technical element and the economic element as much as they can, so that this broader ecosystem of the companies and the buyers and the government can now say, yes, we want to do this. Yes, there are options, and we are starting to have a better sense of how much this is going to cost and the timelines by which we can deploy. I think that was all very abstract, but if there is a theme that I'm starting to, feel like DAC is just a really fun field to work in because there are so many people. A lot of them are trying to do the right thing, and it's changing so quickly that trying to work with all these stakeholders creates a really compelling business problem and also a technical problem.
No, absolutely. So you mentioned the cost and the revenue side of things. Do you think the government incentives, the way they are today, are they big enough to cover the cost of DAC? Do they need to be bigger? Do they need to be structured any differently to really get things to accelerate? Or do I can't remember, is it 45Q and some of these other provisions of the IRA, are they sufficient to really sort of juice the development of these technologies and facilities?
Yeah, another complex question. So, for your audience, there's a provision called 45Q, which says that if you have a DAC project in the United States that meets certain provisions, that you'll get essentially $180 of tax credit for 12 years of the project's lifetime. And there are also other provisions for point source capture, but direct air capture is where we're focused specifically. And I'll just start at the top by saying that if you had told me 5 years ago that sort of provision would be there, I wouldn't have imagined it ever would. And so the fact that it's there at all is really took a lot of hard work from a lot of people working in the background to get that across the finish line. And does that cover the cost of DAC today? No, there's no DAC today that's operating at that cost point that I'm aware of. There are a bunch of companies that are working really hard to get their costs down as low as possible. Airmine is one of them. But in terms of what policy is maybe really needed to maybe get further across the finish line, it's in many ways, I think that the foundation is basically there. That the things that are going to be coming on now might be happening more at the state level. They might be happening more in like smaller policies that kind of in some move the ball forward. In terms of the state of California has a bill going through called SB 308. There's stuff going on and I'm less informed in this, more Massachusetts and New Jersey and New York are all working on these. And I think around the world, we look at Japan just included direct air capture and other carbon removal in some of their emissions trading scheme. And the UK was working on this seriously. The EU is very actively kind of putting this process together. There's a lot of little policy things that are all chipping away at a broader trend, which is that governments want to incentivize this and they understand that they have a part to play in making this economical as well. And I think it just comes back to these broader questions of our trash or like plumbed piped water in a city. Like when for our trash bill, Airmine has a trash bill. We pay, the city of Berkeley some amount of money per month for the trash, but I bet that's subsidized a little bit by the city and by maybe the county. I have a personal trash bill at home that I have to pay. In terms of everybody pays a little bit for these things, but it's taken decades for those systems to emerge until we get to a place where everybody sort of understands what they pay for this quality of life thing that we now take for granted. And carbon removal is going to be one of these messy quality of life improvements that eventually the government, yeah, absolutely has a role in paying for some of it, but we all are going to be paying for it in one way or another because there is no alternative. And the benefits are going to start sounding really good as the climate continues to get worse.
No, that's an interesting analogy. I've never heard that before, and certainly makes a lot of sense because you are removing something and it is undesirable, right? So I like the analogy of trash removal. We're starting to see the voluntary carbon markets kind of develop a little bit. You hear these terms like CDR, and they're going to hopefully be given a higher carbon dioxide removal, higher value in the world of voluntary offsets compared with, say, nature-based credits. Are you guys seeing that at all? Is that something you're following? Is that a potential source of additional revenue for DAC projects to sort of add on to the 45Q?
It's essential, and that's probably where most of our focus actually is. So if we look at the voluntary carbon market, which again just is actors who are not kind of legally compelled to do so, making voluntary purchases of offsets, avoidance offsets, or in this case, removal credits. The real driving force that I see taking shape right now in a very, the voluntary markets there's structure there, but it's a very dynamic thing. Is I think people have heard stories in the past 2 years about some of these forest projects that the quality isn't there, and then people get in the news because they bought removal credits from like a forest that wasn't managed correctly, and now everybody is wondering like what should we be doing to take action while at the same time not participating in projects that have a negative outcome or that hurt our reputation. And then that's, I think, where DAC fits in perfectly, is that if we look at companies that are going to need to put together a portfolio of removal and avoidance offsets because there is no other way for them to hit their commitments, they're looking at a portfolio approach of how they can allocate limited dollars in the way that makes the most sense to them. And so they're building a portfolio of different types of offsets, different types of credits. Direct air capture is going to be one of those types of credits that's in the portfolios. And we want to think about what is the real value that direct air capture provides. And the way I'd phrase it is this: in your portfolio, you're trying to maximize the quality and effectiveness of what you're doing for the dollars that you're spending. And in carbon removal is still under rapid evolution as new technologies get discussed and tested. But if there's one constant, it's that direct air capture is looking like the carbon removal approach where there's the least uncertainty of what's going on. I'll describe our system just at a high level so folks understand how it works. But basically, you have a fan that's blowing air in. In our case, we're using a liquid to capture that carbon dioxide from the air. The rest of the air goes back out into the air just like before. That liquid is holding the CO2. It passes over into what's called a stripping column, where steam basically releases the carbon dioxide. You take the carbon dioxide, you compress it, and now you do something with it. And in this case, it would be you put it into products that can use CO2, or you sequester it geologically. Now, that process I just described, it's effectively a very closed loop. Like we can measure, we can monitor, we can track the CO2 impact of every part of that process. And we can have third parties come and evaluate it. We can have government agencies come out and evaluate it. And this is what's been taking place over the past 10 years. Is very serious folks have kind of looked under the hood of direct air capture and said, okay, we understand how it works and people are doing it. And we think that these are the negative externalities or the risks that are associated with it. And that package of benefits and risks is now the gold standard for removals, which is why I think you have companies like Climeworks that are able to get these very forward-looking contracts with grade A corporations that sort of are willing to partner their name and reputation with them. And other carbon removal approaches are maybe a few years behind and maybe even have some real challenges about how they're going to get to that same level of kind of stamp of quality in terms of where the risks are more controlled. That you have the issue of that nothing is free, so you're paying for that quality. That direct air capture is probably going to be one of the more expensive approaches to carbon removal for many years to come. And that's where this portfolio concept, I think, is really important. That in any portfolio, you're going to have some very high quality credits that are going to be the anchor of what a corporation is building around. And that is going to be sort of, you don't have to worry about that. That was something that was, it was expensive so that you didn't have to count on those having some kind of issue. And then other parts of the portfolio, maybe you take a little bit more risk, but it's anchored by something that's got quality. And that's where DAC is going to be, I think, an increasingly important part of corporations who are making these voluntary purchases. And as the cost of DAC comes down over time, maybe that fraction of where DAC sits in your portfolio can get a little bit bigger if you're wanting to drive down risk even further.
Absolutely. No, Mark, I mean, this has been really helpful. I think we're gonna have you back on to do another 30 minutes because I'm kind of bumping up against time here. But this has been extremely insightful. I think when you think of the approach of combining the government incentives with the voluntary market, you get to a place where DAC can start to make a lot of financial sense. And we're going to be tracking you as well as Airmine, which sounds like a great company. Hats off for the Y Combinator experience, as well as Honeywell. I'm sure you guys are going to continue to progress. And good luck with the A round and with everything you guys are doing.
Thank you so much, Peter, for having us on.